Alrighty, we're picking up where we left off yesterday, where Applegate Skinner is saved by Louis. Um, and then after that, we'll be jumping into chapter 13, End of Summer. Okay, here you go. You're not supposed to go out alone in a canoe. But Applegate was too scared and wet to say anything. He just sat and stared straight ahead, spitting water out from his mouth and breathing hard. At supper that night, Mr. Brickle placed Louis at his right, in the place of honor. When the meal was over, he rose and made a speech. We all saw what happened on the lake today. Applegate Skinner broke a camp rule, took a canoe out alone, and upset. He was drowning when Louis the Swan, rapidly outdistancing all the other campers, reached his side, helped him up, and saved his life. Let us all give Louis a standing ovation. The boys and the counselors stood up. They cheered and clapped and beat on tin plates and spoons. Then they sat down. Louis looked embarrassed. And now, Applegate, said Mr. Brickle, I hope the rescue has caused you to change your opinion of birds. The first day you were here in camp, you told us you didn't care for birds. How do you feel now? I feel sick to my stomach, replied Applegate. It makes you sick at your stomach to almost drown. My stomach still has a lot of lake water in it. Yes, but what about birds? Asked Mr. Brickle. Applegate thought hard for a moment. Well, he said, I'm grateful to Louis for saving my life, but I still don't like birds. Really? Said Mr. Brickle. That's quite remarkable, even though a bird saved you from drowning and you don't care for birds? What have you got against birds? Nothing, replied Applegate. I have nothing against them, I just don't care for them. Okay, said Mr. Brickle. I guess we'll just have to leave it at that. But the camp is proud of Louis. He is our most distinguished counselor, a great trumpet player, a great bird, a powerful swimmer, and a fine friend. He deserves a medal. In fact, I intend to write a letter recommending that he be given the life-saving medal. Mr. Brickle did as he promised. He wrote a letter. A few days later, a man arrived from Washington with the life-saving medal, and while all the other campers watched, he hung the medal around Louis's neck. Alongside the trumpet, the slate, and the chalk pencil. It was a beautiful medal. Engraved on it were the words, To Louis the Swan, who, with outstanding courage and complete disregard for his own safety, saved the life of Applegate Skinner. Louis took off his slate and wrote, Thank you for this medal. It is a great honor. But he thought to himself, I'm beginning to get overloaded with stuff around my neck. I've got a trumpet, I've got a slate, I've got a chalk pencil, now I've got a medal. I'm beginning to look like a hippie. I hope I'll still be able to fly when my flight feathers grow in again. That night, when darkness came, Louis blew the most beautiful taps he had ever blown. The man who had brought the medal was listening and watching. He could hardly believe his ears and his eyes. When he returned to the city, he told people what he had seen and heard. Louis's fame was growing. His name was known. People all over were beginning to talk about the swan that could play a trumpet. Alrighty, jumping into chapter 13, End of Summer. A trumpet has 3 little valves. They are for his fingers of the player. They look like this. So here are the 3 little valves. By pushing down them in the right order, the player can produce all the notes of a musical scale. Louis had often examined these 3 little valves on his horn, but he had never been able to use them. He had 3 front toes on each foot, but being a water bird, he had webbed feet. The webbing prevented him from using his 3 toes independently. Luckily, the valves on a trumpet were not needed for bugle calls, because bugle calls are just the combinations of do, mi, and sol, and a trumpeter can play do, mi, sol without pressing down any of the valves. So his feet look like, I don't know, so like here is 3 toes, and they're webbed, so they've got a material in between them, so he can't individually move them. So if he moves one finger, all his toes go. Yeah, so if he moves one toe, then all his toes go. In order for him to play the notes, they would have to be separated, if that makes sense. If I could just work those 3 valves with my 3 toes, he said to himself, I could play all sorts of music, not just bugle calls. I could play jazz, I could play country and western, I could play rock, I could play the great music of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Sibelius, Gershwin, Irving Berlin, Brahms, everybody. I could really be a trumpet player, not just a camp bugler. I might even get a job with an orchestra. The thought filled him with ambition. Louis loved music, and besides, he was already casting about for ways of making money after camp was over. Although he enjoyed life at Camp Coos, Louis often thought of his home on Upper Red Rock Lake in Montana. He thought about his parents, his brothers and sisters, and about Serena. He was terribly in love with Serena, and he often wondered what was happening to her. At night, he would look up at the stars and think about her. In the late evening, when the big bullfrogs were calling tonk across the still lake, he would think of Serena. Sometimes he felt sad, lonely, and homesick. His music, however, was a comfort to him. He loved the sound of his own trumpet. Summer passed all too quickly. On the last day of camp, Mr. Brickle called his counselors together and paid them what he owed them. Louis received $100, the first money he had ever earned. He had no wallet and no pockets, so Mr. Brickle placed the money in a waterproof bag that had a drawstring. He hung his money bag around Louis's neck, along with the trumpet, the slate, the chalk pencil, and the life-saving medal. Louis went to Sam Beaver's tent and found Sam packing his things. Louis took off his slate and pencil. "I need another job," he wrote. "Where should I go?" Sam sat down on his bed and thought for a while. Then he said, "Go to Boston. Maybe you can get a job with the Swan boat." Louis had never been to Boston, and he had no idea where the Swan boat was, but he nodded his head. Then, on his slate, he wrote, "Do me a favor?" "Sure," said Sam. "Take a razor blade and slit the web on my right foot so I can wiggle my toes." He held out his foot. "Why do you want to wiggle your toes?" asked Sam. "You'll see," wrote Louis. "I need my toes in the business." Sam hesitated. Then he borrowed a razor blade from one of the older counselors. He made a long, neat cut between Louis's inner toe and middle toe, then another cut between his middle toe and his outer toe. "Does it hurt?" Louis shook his head. He lifted his trumpet, placed his toes on the valves, and played do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ca-ho. Sam grinned. The Swan boat will hire you all right. He said. "You're a real trumpeter now. But with your web cut, swimming will be harder for you. You will have a tendency to swim in circles because your left foot will push better than your right foot." "I can manage," wrote Louis. "Thanks very much for the surgery." Next day, the campers left. The canoes had been hoisted onto racks in the boardhouse. The float had been hauled onto the beach. The windows of the lodge had been boarded up against bears and squirrels, and mattresses had been packed into zipper bags. Everything was snug and ready for the long, silent winter. Of all the campers, only Louis stayed behind. His flight feathers were growing fast, but he still couldn't fly. He made up his mind he would remain at camp all alone until he was able to take to the air again. And then he would fly straight to Boston. The lake was lonely without the boys, but Louis didn't mind being alone. For the next 3 weeks, he took life easy. He grew his flight feathers, dreamed of Serena by day and by night, and practiced his trumpet. He had listened to music all summer. Several of the boys had radios and record players, and now he practiced songs on his trumpet. Every day he got better and better. One day, he composed a love song for Serena and wrote the words and music on his slate. "Oh, ever in the greening spring, by bank and bow retiring, for love shall I be sorrowing, and swans of my desiring." He was really thinking of Serena, but he left her name out of it and kept it impersonal. His plumage was beautiful now, and he felt great. On the 21st of September, he tried his wings. To his great relief, they lifted him. Louis rose into the air. The trumpet banged against his slate. The slate knocked against the money bag. The life-saving medal clinked against the chalk pencil, and Louis was airborne again. He climbed and headed for Boston. It was wonderful to be in the sky. "Flying is a lot harder than it was before I acquired all these possessions," thought Louis. "The best way to travel, really, is to travel light. On the other hand, I have to have these things. I've got to have the trumpet if I am to win Serena for my wife. I've got to carry this money bag to hold the money to pay for my father's debt. I've got to carry the slate and pencil so I can communicate with people, and I ought to wear the medal because I really did save a life. And if I didn't wear it, people might think I'm ungrateful." On and on he flew toward Boston, which is the capital of Massachusetts, and which is famous for its baked beans, its codfish, its tea parties, its Cabots, its Lowells, its Salton stalls, and its Swan boats. Alrighty. Next we'll be reading chapter 14. Here is your question. Okay, so what did Sam do so that Louis could play more musical notes on his trumpet? And that's it. Have fun with it, guys.